Welcome to the Resilient Training Lab podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Resilient Training Lab podcast. I'm your host, Ryan, here with Coach Paul. Today, our guest is Tony Montgomery. Tony Montgomery is a veteran. He's an entrepreneur in the strength world. He's the owner of a gym, owner of a performance company, owner of a supplement company, and just an absolute powerhouse in the field of strength training. So thrilled to have him on today. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks for having me on, man. That was a very generous introduction. Entrepreneur and a powerhouse in the same sentence is never something, adjectives I would use to describe myself, but I appreciate it.
Hey, you got a long list on these accolades, man. So
it's because I'm old, man. As you get older, your list gets bigger. That's all it is.
And you're also an accomplished powerlifter. So I have down here that you've totaled over 2,000 pounds. You're an Elite FTS sponsored lifter, and you're going back to school. Could you touch a little bit on those for me?
Yeah. So I totaled 2001 and 2006. So I did it twice just to make sure the first time wasn't a fluke. And that was in the 242 class with wraps. And then I got picked up by Elite FTS last year, I think March or April. They had a sports summit, and I went out there, myself and Kaylee, and I applied for Elite FTS for five years in a row, and I've never quite made it, but never really stopped me from wanting to apply and be part of the team. And they picked me up that time as a coach and a columnist. So I'm able to do a coaching blog for them, and I write monthly articles for them as well. And just being able to, pick the brains of all the athletes and all the coaches there, and Dave himself has been a blessing. So I'm very thankful for that. And then the last one, see, I'm old. I can't remember too many things. What was the last one?
You're going back to school, right, man?
Yeah, see, exactly. The thing So I'm going back to school, which hopefully, based off of the way this conversation's going, is probably not going to go very well. But yeah, I am planning on going to school in the fall at USF, University of South Florida, and pursuing my master's degree. And then after that, I'll be going to an undetermined school yet for my PhD, all within the realm of exercise science. At USF, their exercise science program has the subcategory of physique enhancement, where they just focus on strictly performance and nutrition, weight loss, and hypertrophy. So that'll be a lot of fun to get down there and do some of the research they're doing and take some of the classes that they're able to provide. And then from there, I haven't quite made up my mind on the PhD side of things, whether or not I want to pursue something a little bit more of the sports performance side of things, or staying with the nutrition side of things, or, not really 100% sure. I'm sure I'll get a clearer picture of that as I start within my master's program and get an idea of the research I like to do and the things that I start to gravitate towards.
Yeah, I hope you're really comfortable with Zoom. Going back to school right now is going to be unique.
Yeah, for sure. It is unique. I'm in school right now, just working on my second bachelor's, just to make sure. It's kind of like more or less just to make sure I can go back to school and feel comfortable with doing it while running the businesses we have. And everything's going really well. But yeah, everything's already on Zoom here, so it'll be a good learning escapade. The hard thing is if this continues, how the research is going to go. Seems like it'd be impossible to do, and that's one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to, is the actual research side of things. So hopefully this doesn't last until September.
For sure. So getting into the research side of things and nutrition, how long have you been in the strength field, or how long have you been lifting weights and a competitive powerlifter?
I've been a competitive powerlifter for 6 years now, I believe. And I've been in the strength side of things for about 12 years. I started off, once I got out of the Marines, I started off with strongman, did that for 4 or 5 years, and then pursued a little bit of endurance sports for about a year and a half, and then got into some more powerlifting. And that's kind of where I've been as far as an athlete. But as far as a coach goes, I've worked with a ton of athletes, what I would consider real athletes, not powerlifters. No offense to the powerlifters out there, but I think they understand. But yeah, when I first started out, I wanted to be like a strength and conditioning coach. So I worked with a lot of athletes. I helped a couple guys in the NFL, helped a couple guys get ready for the NFL Combine, a bunch of high school kids. And then as I gravitated away from that, I started to focus more on strength athletes and building that up, and doing nutrition and strength training for them has been kind of the forte for the last 6 years in total. Yeah.
So doing nutrition for strength athletes, is that how you and Paul met? Is that how you guys started working together?
Yeah, that's how myself and Coach Paul. I don't know why I wasn't Coach Tony, but that's cool. But yeah, that's how myself and Paul met. I think it was maybe recommended through Carlos or somebody. I'm not 100% sure. Paul could probably tell you.
Carlos recommended you. Been following you for a while on Instagram, and ever since then we've been working together. It's been a while now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a good bit. I think I had you on my podcast first, and we talked some training and stuff, and then we just kind of kept in touch and started working on your nutrition and helping you out with that. But yeah, I've been doing the nutrition side of things for roughly like 6-7 years online, and then the online strength training for about the same amount of time.
How did you start with the nutrition side of things, right? So you were a competitive athlete. Did you recognize that it was overlooked and incredibly important to your performance? Was it something that you've always felt passionate about? How did this whole thing get rolling?
Oh man, absolutely not. In the beginning, like when I was in high school, I was like a biggest like reward member for McDonald's, man. I would go to McDonald's after practice and eat like shit. And even when I was in the military, I ate what I thought was okay. Like I thought, if I got barbecue chicken on my pizza, I was like, oh, I'm good, man. I hit my protein, like I'm good to go. And, and I worked hard enough that it didn't, really matter too much in terms of like body composition. And also being younger. But when I got out of the military and wanted to focus more on just strength side of things, I hired a nutritionist right out of the military because I wasn't 100% sure on the nutrition side of things. And the best way to learn is to learn from people who have been doing it for a very long time. So I hired Shelby Starnes right out of the military, and we started doing carb cycling. And that was kind of the introduction to nutrition and the importance of it, because I was a natural athlete at the time, and working with him, you learn a lot as a natural athlete at doing nutrition, because things matter a little bit more. You have to be a little bit more precise. You can't rely on drugs and stuff like that to make up for your shortcomings in the nutrition side of things. So being able to do that in the very beginning, I think was extremely helpful. And I learned a lot from him. And I don't have like a background education wise in nutrition. I didn't go to school for it. I went to school for exercise science, but I learned a lot by working with coaches. I've worked with, like I said, Shelby Starnes. I worked with Dr. Mike Israetel. I worked with Justin Harris. I worked with Mike Mastel, who you guys know up there in Connecticut. And I worked with Austin Stout. So some of the best guys in the business to learn from and pick their brains. And that was kind of the way I pursued my college education for nutrition with those guys.
Yeah, in the 9 minutes that we've been talking, you've been hammering out some pretty big names that you've worked with. So I'm sure they've all had
really good at name dropping.
Yeah, I mean, they've had probably a huge influence on your mindset and your approach with all of your clients that you work with. And so can we just head into sort of what your philosophy is when it surrounds nutrition, and how you approach working with your athletes, and the different things that maybe you do a little bit different and you've learned over the course of the years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, definitely. So when I first started with nutrition, I always thought like, a meal plan is what people did. That was just like the natural thing. Like, this is what you eat. This is what I'm telling you to eat. And the idea of a macro-based diet was not something that was really popular back then. But then working with Shelby, we did macros, and I learned that was a great approach in terms of figuring things out on your own, it's kind of like using RPE for lifters, right? You learn to auto-regulate, you learn to figure out what foods work best for you. So my philosophy as a nutritionist is, one, understanding the dynamics of everybody's different. What works in science may not work for that person. So being able to fully understand what that athlete or that client needs, and then being able to build out their nutrition plan based on that concept. So making sure that if a client is like, I don't really like a certain amount of fats, or I don't like these kind of carbohydrates, then to make sure that I listen to them and I don't include those things so that they're able to adhere to the diet. So my biggest philosophy would be that adherence is first and foremost the most important thing. And then if you can get someone to adhere, then you can start to slowly get them to focus more on the performance scientific side of things. So just making sure that we design a diet that they're able to fully comprehend and adhere to. And that can look completely different for a lot of people. If they're novices or beginners, and they've never dieted a day in their life, then just making like simple modifications to their diet without a complete overhaul, so it's not fully overwhelming, would be the route I would go. So it'd be like if they drank 3 sodas a day, it would be reducing it down to 1 soda, and eventually no sodas, and go to diet soda, and then eventually go to water with Crystal Light, and then eventually go to water, and slowly making that progression over months is the way that I would approach their calorie balance that you're trying to generate. But if it's with an experienced lifter who's had practice with diet and with counting macronutrients with food and stuff like that and tracking, then we can go straight into a macro based diet. So that's kind of the philosophy, is just making sure that you don't overwhelm the client, that they get a certain amount of protein in. Protein is probably the most important macronutrient, I would say. And anywhere between like 1.8 to 2.2 kilograms per gram of body weight. And that, that may sound like a little for some people, and that may sound like a lot. So being able to figure out ways to make sure that they're able to get their protein in, and then to not completely overhaul their diet to where they feel very overwhelmed and they're not able to adhere to it. And then if they're more advanced with their nutrition strategies, then going straight into a macro based diet and focusing on performance in the gym, which would mean kind of looking at the nutrient timing side of things and looking at making sure that their macronutrients are attuned more towards the style of training. If they're more of an aerobic athlete or anaerobic athlete, that their macros are more geared towards that. But basic principles, the protein is a must at the kilograms per body weight. Fiber from vegetables and fruit is a must, right around like 20 to 35 grams, depending on the size of the person. And then beyond that, making sure that we have foods that digest well within their body. Their gut's constantly messed up and they're not able to digest their food, then they're going to have a lot of issues adhering to the plan. And those are kind of like the 3 biggest like tenets of building out a nutrition plan for most of my clients.
So when you mention everybody starts with adherence and then you move into a more macro-based approach, and then you sort of refine and fine-tune as you continue working with this person, are there certain milestones or check marks that you're looking for to move somebody from maybe like a tier 1 or like a basic plan to a more advanced one?
Yeah, so if they're like very basic, it would be more of a flexible meal plan. So I would give them 3 different like menu options that would hit their macronutrients without them knowing what their macronutrients are. And then during that process, slowly kind of educate them on what macronutrients are and the importance of tracking them, and then have them start to slowly track the flexible plan that I've given them. And then from there, if they're able to do that and they feel comfortable tracking, then we would advance to macro-based only diets. And from there, it wouldn't be as much thinking about nutrient timing, whether that be nutrient timing throughout the day or weekly nutrient timing, which would be more like calorie cycling. But that would be the next approach, is doing some sort of calorie cycling, whether that be a high carb day followed by a lower carb day if they're not training. So non-training days would be low carbs, and then training days would be higher carbs. Or if it's just simply training days are higher calories and non-training days are lower calories. And that would be the more advanced approach to the tiers of the nutrition plan. And then beyond that, I don't really think that there needs to be much more complication to it. Yeah, I think that would be as far as I go, as far as the tiers go. And then from that, like 3rd tier of the calorie cycling, just making sure that we find things that allow them to train as hard as they want to improve their recovery. When they're in a calorie surplus, it's pretty easy. When they're in a calorie deficit, it gets a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that I think you gave the example of fats. If somebody's feeling sort of unhappy with the amount of fats that they have, is that purely from a performance decrement standpoint or them not feeling good? How do you decide what's something that a person should sort of suck up and deal with versus something that needs to be changed?
So I think there's like I know there's minimum thresholds to make sure that people stay within a healthy range for certain macronutrients. So like fats, there's not too much of a guideline on what is recommended, but there's definitely a guideline to what you don't want to go below, and you don't want to go below like 15% to 20% of your calories coming from fats, just because of what fats do. Fats provide a lot of hormonal support. They provide help with cholesterol, testosterone, pretty much all the hormones within your body. Fat's going to help develop and provide. And then they also keep you satiated throughout the day a little bit better than carbohydrates. And they also help with other things like, skin care, hair, just little things like that, where if you start to take away and chip away at fat to where it's in that negative range, they can start having health detriment. So that would be the biggest drawback to thinking about reducing certain macronutrients, would be the health perspective of things, not necessarily the performance side of things, because most people or most science would show that fats don't really do anything for your overall performance in any capacity whatsoever in terms of actual output and performance. So it would be more or less a health outcome from that point.
So you also mentioned in that last question, carb cycling. You think you go a little more into the idea behind carb cycling, why you do that, and what's involved in that process?
Yeah, definitely. So carb cycling, the thought process is that in order to maintain a healthy body composition, whether you're gaining or losing weight, you want to make sure that your body is as insulin sensitive as possible. So the idea is that on the training days when you need carbohydrates the most, and this can also vary on the time of day that you train, but let's say you train in the evening and carbohydrates are what fuel your training, whether you're an aerobic athlete or an anaerobic athlete, then those days would be higher in carbohydrates. And because they're higher in carbohydrates, typically will reduce the fat, because you don't want, when you have a high carbohydrate meal, it can spike your insulin. And if your insulin spiked, it's a good shuttling mechanism for everything that's within your body. So it could potentially shuttle fat into adipose tissue, which would increase your body fat percentage potentially. Obviously, your body does a great job of regulating those things and maintaining homeostasis. So that's the idea behind that. If you have a huge surplus of carbohydrates, you keep your fats low. But on the other hand, you still want your fats throughout the week to be relatively within that standard. So you kind of make up for it on your non-training days. So you'll start to lower your carbohydrates. And the idea there is, one, you're making up for the fats that you neglected on your higher carb day. But two, you're also lowering your carbohydrates so that your body isn't blasted by carbohydrates and spiking insulin. So your pancreas kind of has a day to rest and relax. And that will kind of keep you insulin sensitive throughout your mass gaining phase or any phase. And what the research kind of shows is the more insulin sensitive you are, usually the better your body composition is, usually the better your health is in terms of diabetes, in terms of heart disease and stuff like that. There's a pretty strong correlation. Obviously, there's a huge causation with insulin and diabetes, but there's also a higher correlation with higher insulin, becoming insulin resistant and other health factors too. So it's not only a thing to help with body composition and performance, but it's also to help with overall health and longevity as well.
So you kind of brought up the kind of hot word there is insulin. Sometimes insulin gets a bad rep, but it sounds like from that explanation that there's times you kind of want insulin and times you don't. So can you kind of talk about a little bit about insulin and what it does and why it's not always bad?
Yeah, definitely. So insulin is what a lot of people would deem a very anabolic hormone within the body. Although it doesn't have anabolic properties, the fact that it helps shuttle nutrients and it helps uptake protein synthesis, that can make it anabolic, but it's also very anti-catabolic as well. So if you're having carbohydrates around training, what you're doing essentially is you're delaying the breakdown of muscle tissue while also promoting the buildup of muscle tissue. So it's kind of a very cool dual effect to do both of those things. And like I said, it's a shuttling mechanism, so it's able to shuttle carbohydrates to muscle glycogen a little bit faster, a little bit better. So having insulin, a high in carbohydrate meal during training or a shake, and then having one after training can help with muscle glycogen, can help with recovery, can help with restoring protein synthesis and getting things moving in the right direction to aid in the recovery process. But it's also one of those things where if you're constantly spiking your insulin, which insulin can be spiked, one of the negative correlations with insulin is obviously people think carbohydrates, but insulin can be spiked with any type of high calorie food. So you can have a high protein surplus and that can spike your insulin. You can have a high fat content and that can spike your insulin. So it's not so much that carbohydrates are the main or the bad guy, but carbohydrates are one of the main mechanisms to spike insulin a lot faster. But that can also be resolved a little bit with the glycemic index and having carbohydrates that don't spike as fast, but also just having more complete meals too won't spike the insulin as fast as well. Like I said, your body's very much keen to maintaining homeostasis and keeping things in check as long as you're not a glutton. And that seems to be the biggest thing with most of it is the idea of earning your carbohydrates is something that Charles Poliquin kind of coined many, many years ago. And that is that, if you're a very sedentary person, the idea that you need carbohydrates, which is our fastest and main energy source within our body, is a kind of a moot point. You're just at that point in time, you're just eating carbohydrates just to eat them to satiate whatever cravings you're having because your body doesn't need them because you're not actually an active person. So the more active you are, whether that be with a job or with training, the more carbohydrates you're going to need to replenish and help with the energy balance depending on what your goals are.
So with so many different things that you've just talked about, right? You brought up calories, carbs, fats, proteins, timing of your nutrients. There's a lot of room for manipulation in there and a lot of room to fine tune a plan to the individual that's in front of you. So are there different ways that you handle a client who is looking for fat loss versus a client who's looking for weight gain versus performance?
Yeah. So obviously the biggest thing you want to look at is energy balance when it comes to weight loss and weight gain. With weight gain, it's not so much that there's certain tenets you want to follow. It's just that you want to make sure that with the excess calories that they're getting, that they're eating foods that don't necessarily disrupt their digestive process and that they're eating foods that digest fast and digest well with them. So you may go from things that aren't as satiating or aren't as voluminous to things that are a little bit easier to digest. So for instance, if you're someone who's on a weight loss phase, you may have them eat oatmeal because it's more satiating. And then if they're going into a weight gaining phase and their calories are getting higher, they may switch to cereal because it's easier to eat. And then some people would understand the concept of cereal may have more sugar and it may not seem like that would be the route to go. But at the end of the day, that's going to digest the best in that person's stomach. So they're able to continue to push the process of gaining weight. And then if it's from a weight loss perspective, there's definitely tenets that you want to look into. One is making sure that protein is at that rate of 1.8 to 2.2 kilograms per gram of body weight. And if you are going to overeat any of the macronutrients, protein is the one to do that, because there's actually been some really good research on protein overfeeding where they had Dr. Antonio had his subjects do 4.4 grams per kilogram, I think, 4.4 grams per kilogram, which is an extremely high amount of protein. They were in a calorie surplus compared to their control group, who was still at a high amount of protein. They were at 2.0 or 2.2. And the group that had more protein that was in a calorie surplus actually lost more fat than the group that wasn't in a calorie surplus. So it's a very interesting study that hasn't necessarily been replicated completely, but there's also been some studies that definitely confirm that protein is the smarter choice. It's also more satiating, so that when you are in, their calories are getting lower, that would be a good macronutrient to have. And then you also want to think about performance in the gym when it comes to weight loss. So if you're able to maintain strength and maintain performance in the gym as much as possible, then that's going to be a good sign that you're keeping as much muscle on as you can while you're in a weight loss phase. So people that dramatically drop a lot of weight, not necessarily from a 1 rep max, because that has to do with a lot of leverages, but in that 6 to 12 rep range, if they drop a lot of strength while they're dieting, the likelihood that they're losing a lot of tissue is a lot higher. So making sure that you're timing your carbohydrates around training is going to be extremely important when you're in a weight loss phase. And then the calories that you're pulling from should never really come from those 3 meals: your pre-workout, your intra-workout, and your post-workout meals. You're going to be pulling calories further away from them. The idea is I'd rather you feel like crap throughout the day than feel like crap while you're training, if your main goal is to maintain as much muscle as possible. If you're just a general weight loss client, the idea is still to maintain as much muscle as possible, because you want to keep the basal metabolic rate as high as you can while they're dieting, so they don't hit that point of kind of no return where they start to have metabolic shutdown and issues like that. But it's not as pertinent to that you can have things a little bit more evenly spread out if it's a general weight loss person. And then if they're, then performance wise, that would be the biggest tenets for weight loss, is just making sure that the protein stays at where it's supposed to stay at, and that you do nutrient timing to keep carbohydrates around training. That's when you can kind of reduce fat. That would be the first macronutrient I would reduce to as low as you possibly can while you're making those reductions, and keep carbohydrates as high as possible. Because you have to understand, not every goal that you have is going to be solely based around health. Sometimes weight loss, you can't put health as a priority. It can be a secondary priority, and you can maintain it, but it's not something that you should think about, because it's not a long-term approach. Whatever consequences you can create in your body with reducing your fats, that can be restored later on. But if you reduce carbohydrates a lot and your training starts to go to crap, and then you have metabolic issues because you're not able to keep things moving the way you want them to, then that's going to have more of a detrimental effect down the road. Performance wise, there's not really much of a difference between performance and calorie surplus. You want a small calorie surplus, anywhere between 15 to 20% increase in calories in the very beginning, and thinking about like a slow weight gain of 0.5 to 1 pound per month. Focusing on that would be the best thing for performance athletes and for people trying to gain weight. There's been a few studies out now, ones with Eric Helms, where they showed that slower weight increase is going to be better long-term as far as putting on muscle and not putting on as much fat than people that were in a bigger surplus, not a huge surplus. I think it was 200 calories versus 500 calories. The 200 calorie group had better body composition and with the same amount of muscle mass as the group that had 500 calories. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to stay in a surplus for longer without feeling the need to drop and cut weight, which is the idea for any strength athlete, any performance athlete in general. The more you can be in a surplus, the more you're going to be able to improve your performance, as long as you don't get overly fat.
So you kind of talked a little bit about how it's important to gain weight slowly, and how it's probably better to gain weight slowly. On the flip side of things, when you're having someone lose weight, what kind of rates are you expecting them to lose weight at? Is that going to change based on how much weight they have to lose, or?
Yeah, so almost the same thing, right? You want that 15 to 20% decrease in total calories to begin with, and then from there you want about a 1% decrease in body weight per week. So if you're obviously 300 pounds, that may look like 3 pounds a week. If you're smaller, that's going to look a lot smaller for you. So that would be kind of the rate of weight loss you want to look at. And you don't want to necessarily get to that point where you're at a 25% decrease from your maintenance calories unless you're trying to step on stage. So as a performance athlete, I always tell people, let your performance drive how long you want to diet for. If your performance starts to suffer, then that's when I would start to change the diet around to more of a weight gain or a maintenance approach. But that rate of weight loss is very much similar to the rate of weight gain in terms of being able to maximize efficiency of both of those.
So another thing you mentioned there was kind of health and weight loss and how sometimes they're not always the same thing. I think sometimes people get caught up in this idea that they constantly need to be losing weight to be the healthiest version of themselves. And sometimes that's just not true. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much stigmatized, right? Like the idea of health is a certain look, and that can be so far from the truth for certain people. And something I always talk about with athletes trying to lose weight is I try to guide them towards like ESPN Body Magazine. Have you guys seen that, where they do the body images stuff?
Yep.
And it shows how every athlete at their highest peak performance looks completely different. And almost none of them are shredded, right? So the idea that health comes with extremely low percent of body fat is something that's kind of been pushed on people through the media. The healthiest person is going to be the one that does things in moderation as much as possible. And the way I tend to look at it and tell people is, if you want to be a healthy person, your training should have you leaving the gym feeling better than you came into it. If you're going to be a high performance person, there's going to be days where you leave the gym and you're limping out of it. And that's just the way it goes. And the same thing with nutrition advice. If you want to focus on health, the biggest things I would focus on is making sure that you hit vegetables, you hit fruits, and you hit your protein. Minimize carbohydrates as much as you can, and focusing solely on how you feel, not so much how you look. So that would be based on whether you have a job or whether you're someone that goes to the gym. How you feel day to day is going to tell you significantly where your health is. So anyone that's ever tried to lose weight and gotten lean, as the leaner you get, the more and more you start to feel like shit. It's like death is creeping on your door and it's just knocking every percent of body fat you get down. And, you start to drag, you can't stay awake, but then you can't go to sleep either. So it's just like fucking little devil that's just beating on you all the time. You want to go to sleep because you're exhausted. But then when you try to go to sleep, you can't go to sleep because you're super lean, and then you're hungry all the time. That's not what I would consider healthy, but that's going to get you to the leanest point that you'll ever get to. Right. And those are some of the sacrifices you have to make. So the idea of healthy is going to be different for every individual. There's some people who are just biologically not lean. And for them to actually get down to a 4-pack or a 2-pack or a 6-pack, they're not going to be what I would consider healthy. A healthier person is going to kind of have some fat on them if they've always been a fat person. Right. You can't change your genetics and your biology that much. So if you're constantly trying to fight that because you don't like the way you look, that's not what I would consider the healthiest way to go about things, but that's not always psychologically. You have to think about like psychological health too, right? Biological health is one thing, but psychological health is another. Would you rather feel a little bit like crap and underperform all the time, but look better and like the way you look? So there's give and take to everything, but I always try to get my athletes to focus on nutrition drives performance, and then performance will drive how you look. And that's going to be different for every individual. But as soon as they can get away from the scale and body composition and stuff like that, they're going to be a lot happier. They're going to be a lot more productive, and they're going to be able to adhere to things a lot better. Because, one of the things we've talked about is this idea of these timelines, these arbitrary timelines, or these arbitrary numbers that people put on diets. And it's like, I have to, get as lean as I can in 12 weeks. And like, that's so detrimental to your ability to perform at a high level, or it's like I have to get down to the 165 class because that's what I signed up for, and they're like 185, and you're like, well, that wasn't a smart choice, right? Like these idea of these numbers that determine everything is so ridiculous because you're putting yourself in a position where it's not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, then it's going to be a battle you deal with for the rest of your life. And that's not the whole point of training or nutrition.
Yeah, I think sometimes people see these Instagram stars and these models, and they, they aspire to look like that, and they don't realize, like you said, there's a lot of give and take there, and there's a lot of sacrifice that happens to get that lean. And just because they're the ones that are getting all the follows and likes doesn't mean that they're necessarily the healthiest person or in a spot where they can kind of have some freedom psychologically from their diet, where it almost becomes part of their job and more of a chore than it is a pleasure. So it's good that you touched on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up a good point too, right? Like nutrition and dieting, is not always going to be something that's going to be fun too. And you, as a person, you have to fully understand that, because you have both ends of the spectrum, right? You have some coaches who are like, yeah, my person's dieting on 3,000 calories and they're super lean. And it's like, well, yeah, you have a genetic freak. Congratulations. You're one of those people where we increased your calories and you got leaner, and we posted that up. And I had so many people be like, yeah, I want to do that. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you're going to be genetically in that field to do that. I hate to burst your bubble. Some people have to work harder than others. That's just life. You wouldn't trade Paul's leanness for his stomach issues, because that's everyone only sees pictures, right? And when it comes to pictures too, it's like, man, these people are lean for maybe a month, and they do like 13, 14 different photo shoots within that month so that they can post pictures on a yearly basis of them always being lean, or they're on drugs year round, right? None of that is healthy. They're constantly depriving themselves. They're a prisoner to their diet. They're a prisoner to their image that they portrayed themselves as. And, if you have to live that lifestyle, if you have to create this image of yourself that's not really you, and you continue to do that, psychologically, you're living in a life of depression, because that's what happens to a lot of those people. They live in this solitary life of confinement and depression, because that's the image they've portrayed for themselves of they have to be this lean person year round. So they never leave their house. They always have their meals with them. And it's like, man, that's not the point of nutrition. That's not the point of iron culture. That's not the point of training, right? The whole point of that stuff is to live a better, more fulfilled, more fun life. And that's the point you got to get to with everything.
But they have sweet abs.
They do have sweet abs for sure. But last time I checked, abs don't necessarily create happiness and success for a lot of people. But yeah, they do. They take really cool selfies for sure.
Yeah, calling them out, I think doing a bunch of photo shoots at once. Nobody's that lean year round.
Right, exactly.
I think Paul brought up a really good point too, about how we're just constantly sold this idea that we need to constantly be less, or we need to constantly be losing to be the healthiest version of ourselves, when really, I think you had a really good answer, Tony, where if we can tie them all together with our psychological status and our performance and our well-being, that'll really be a better approach to nutrition and training and sort of this entire lifestyle, because it can get overwhelming and it can get very addictive, or sort of like crushing to always be focusing on so many different facets of your training, your food, your lifestyle. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of like anything that you do in your life, you should be able to be like, hell yeah, man, I enjoy doing this, and sometimes it's hard, right? Like sometimes you get enjoyment of doing hard things, but there's a sense of fulfillment there that I think a lot of people need to focus on. If you're constantly that person that's like beating themselves up every time they look in the mirror, every time they step on the scale, that's not the life you want to live. And the fact that you're doing that is the idea that you're comparing yourself to this image that you think you should be in your head, when in all reality, that has nothing to do with who you are as a person and where you are in your life right now. And I think people need to be a little bit more forgiveful of themselves, and I think they need to be a little bit friendlier with how they view themselves and what they say to themselves, but they also can't let themselves off the hook too. So it's like everything, it's a fine balance, right? You want to have that discipline to train hard. You want to have that discipline to eat good. And if that's what you're focused on, then I think the body you get from that is your natural best peak performance body, right? If you're constantly eating so that you can train good, because anybody that's, dieted, if you go off your plan and you eat like shit, then you feel like shit for like a day or two, right? Your stomach hurts, you can't train well. So if you're constantly focused on, pushing that performance envelope, pushing that how you feel envelope, then you're going to eat better naturally without thinking about the scale, without thinking about body image. And I think that should be the trajectory that people go on for sure.
Yeah, and you said something in different words that Carlos had also said to us about falling in love with the process. And so when you fall in love with the process of training, yes, there are going to be sessions that feel crappy, or you fall in love with the process of sticking to your diet plan. Like, yes, there are going to be days where you break it and you feel like crap. What are your methods, or how do you approach everybody when it comes to creating something that's sustainable, right? So like the biggest or the easiest example that I'm thinking of right now is, do you have people weigh themselves daily? Do you think people should weigh themselves like weekly? What are some things you do to handle different mindsets surrounding nutrition?
Yeah, so building those like healthy habits and those healthy sustainable habits is the way I look at it. You want sustainable habits and behavior. So whenever you start off on any type of fitness journey or weight loss journey or any type of nutrition, you want to make sure that you're doing things in a sustainable manner. So an example of that would be like, if I'm 250 pounds right now, and if I was like, man, I want to run a marathon, and tomorrow is when I start training, and I go out there and I run, 5 miles is the goal. It's like, well, I haven't ran in like years. So that goal, I may have got there maybe day one, may have been the hardest 5 mile run I've ever done in my life, but that's not something that's sustainable, right? We all know that you can start off with very, very minimal amount of effort and get extremely great results. So my idea would be to tell that person to initially start off with what fits within their lifestyle to begin with. So if they only have 30 minutes a day right now to start training, then that 30 minutes would be something geared towards their goal, whether that be weight training or whether that be aerobic. And it wouldn't be starting off with something that seems so out of reach. And that's what happens with a lot of people with their New Year's resolutions. They set these extreme goals like, I am not going to eat sugar for the whole year. It's like, that's impossible to do, right? Like no one wants to not eat sugar for the entire year, or they're going to run 3 miles every single day and they haven't done a consistent week of training in their life. It's like, these goals are so huge and unsustainable. So that would be my thing, is I would talk to the person like, well, what can you do right now that fits in with your lifestyle? And that person may be like, I can train twice a week for 20 minutes. And it's like, cool. What kind of training do you want to do? I really enjoy riding my bike. That would be the initial process to get them in the habit of a healthier mindset. And the same thing with nutrition. It's like, all right, well, what do you love to eat? And this person, like, I love to eat X, Y, and Z. Like, I love to eat pizza with my family on Saturday. I love to have a glass of wine every night, and then you're like, all right, well, let's keep that in. What are some of the things that you think you can get rid of now? And they're like, I eat kids cereal for breakfast. I can probably get rid of that and eat oatmeal. It's like, cool. That's a better option, right? You're starting to make these small, insignificant changes to that person, but they can make such a huge difference. And you're starting to build these healthy habits. And I think, that kind of mindset of like, start off small and then slowly build from there is extremely important for people. And then I also think that habit stacking works really well. And that's something that I got from Atomic Habits, the book by James Clear. And he talks about, if they already have a daily habit in place, like, every morning they wake up and they make coffee. All right, while you're making coffee, do 10 bodyweight squats, right? So they have that habit that they already do. Then they stack a habit that they want to start doing right on top of that. And they're going to be more likely to continue with that habit until it becomes until it forms a habit. Most habits form within that 14 to 21 day mark. So just kind of keeping them on track with habits that they already have and then slowly stacking on new things is another great way to start building that person towards a more sustainable lifestyle. But that's the biggest thing I think of when people are starting out is what's sustainable for you. What do you love? What are you not willing to compromise on? And then what are you willing to compromise on? And just being able to work with that person through those dynamics is going to yield itself to the best results.
For sure. And with that, creating sustainable habits over the long term, a lot of times people want it now, right? We talked about delaying gratification and how we're going to be better tomorrow if we do something that we don't want to do today. Do you have any specific strategies that you use with somebody who might be a little bit impatient, or any pitfalls that they're commonly making that you encourage people to avoid?
Yeah, I tend to talk to that person and understand where they're coming from. So it's usually a psychological thing that creates this short-term gratification, whether it's like they constantly are on Instagram, so that makes them think that they need to get leaner faster. So then it would be like, all right, well, let's put away social media for a couple days and let's see if you feel the same way. And typically they don't feel that way because they're not continually blasted with this idea of how they should look. So it's usually a psychological thing. So getting to talk to them and figure out their underlying and underpinning reasons of why they're doing what they're doing can help you fully help them understand, these instant gratification ideas, and then just kind of conveying to them the importance of making something sustainable over the long run is going to produce the best results possible. And a good example of that would be The Biggest Loser, right? They put these people on these extreme diets, extreme workout programs that aren't sustainable when they get back to real life, because they're training 12 hours a day. They're eating no food. Now they go back, they have jobs, they have responsibilities, and they can't sustain it. So they put all that weight back on. So just being able to talk to them about the idea of sustainability over the long term, but also allowing them to give them what they want as well, right? If they're making progress towards their goals, they're probably not going to talk about, short-term gratification, like how fast they want to get to someplace. It's like with training, when you're working with individuals, you kind of give them 50% of what they want to do, and then you give them 50% of what they need to do so that they're constantly happy. They have that influx of like, oh man, I'm getting to train the way I want to train, but then you're also kind of like sneaking in other things. My buddy Jordan Shallow says a good analogy would be like, when you're a kid and your mom tries to make you eat vegetables, she just grinds it up into your food so that you're eating vegetables without knowing you're eating vegetables. Then like 10 years down the road, she tells you and you're like, oh, you've been lying to me this whole time. First it's Santa Claus, now it's vegetables. How can I ever trust you again, Mom?
Yeah, vegetables in the spaghetti sauce, right?
Right, exactly. So that's kind of what we do with their nutrition, right? It's like you play little tricks on them. When people initially sign up with you for weight loss, you can manipulate their diet in a way where they drop like 5 pounds in a week, and it's just water drop, but they need to see that for them to continue to stay adherent to the program. So it's just, giving them little tricks to help them know that their goals are attainable, but also continue to educate them and talk to them about the psychological benefits of a more of a long-term, what they call it in the strength and conditioning realm is like long-term athletic development program. So we want to put them on a long-term development program. So it's constantly continuing to educate them on like, this is the direction we're going. These are the steps we're taking, and to continue to make them feel comfortable with everything. If you educate people, they feel better about things. If you keep them in the dark about stuff, then they're going to constantly question things. They're going to constantly want bigger and better things. So it's a very much an educational process, along with also making sure that they're getting to their goals too.
So you brought up something there that we talk about a lot when it comes to training, and that's mindset and kind of your mindset towards your training program. How much do you feel that kind of affects people's success with their diets and success with their nutrition plans, is their mindset towards the plan and their mindset around the plan?
I mean, it's huge, man. Same like with training, right? If you enjoy your training plan, it can be the shittiest plan in the world. You'll probably still get pretty good results because you're going to the gym, you're having fun, you're training hard. With nutrition, right? Like dieting and losing weight, it's never the most fun, right? it's not something that people look forward to. They don't look forward to feeling hungry. They don't look forward to dragging. They don't look forward to taking out certain foods. So those are the things that you try to manipulate as much as possible. And that's kind of the idea of making it fun, making it enjoyable. So that's why I like the flexible diet in with macronutrients, so that they can continue to have the things that they want in their life, whether it be a chocolate bar here and there, and still make progress. So making sure that you're not taking away everything out of their diet, so that they still have meals that they look forward to and enjoy. Maybe helping them learn how to cook, helping them learn how to season. Like, you want people to look forward to their food and enjoy it. And I know that there is research that shows, right, the more bland you can make your food, the more likely you are to adhere to your diet. But that's like a bodybuilding approach where people have to get super lean. It's a short-term thing. But if you're thinking about lifestyle changes, helping people learn how to cook better, helping people learn to enjoy their food, and that's strictly by just not taking everything away from them, showing that then that they can lose weight by still eating what people would quote unquote call bad food, right? And I think that allows them to have fun and adhere to it. And also, like I said before, making sure that you're giving them foods and diet plans that they enjoy, but they're also not overly complicated as well, right? Like, with you have a training day meal and you have a non-training day meal. If it's someone that's like never counted calories before, have never done macros before, I wouldn't give them opposite days. I would make sure everything's the exact same every single day, just because you don't want it to be a pain in their butt as well.
So what you had mentioned there was there's like the specific approach to a person. And I know with nutrition, it's just very emotionally charged for people, right? They have these beliefs and these mindsets around things that, maybe they learned something when they were a kid. And at the time it was, said in good faith, and the person thought that they were giving them good info, and they just lived their entire lives with these like fucked up warped views on the foods that they're eating. So what do you do to help somebody who's having a really hard time with either like some strategies that you offer, or like, so I'm thinking specifically of like people who love like intermittent fasting or keto. How do you like breach those topics with people, as well as giving them a break from some of the things that they've been having a hard time with doing?
Yeah. So the thing that you said that resonated with me was the fact that like a lot of these things have been ingrained with us throughout our childhood, right? Like, make sure you eat everything on your plate. And now as an adult, you're like, oh, I got to continue that trend. So you eat past satiation. So it's a lot of it has to do with repurposing and re-signaling hunger cues. A lot of people have non-hungry eating, where they eat when they're bored. They eat when they're not even hungry. They're just doing it just to do it. So teaching them the psychology of why they're doing what they do and what they're doing, and then continuing to give them kind of like the tools to fix that. So if it is someone who has the biggest problem with, they always have to finish what's on their plate, so they're always constantly overeating, have them have smaller plates, right? Simple things like that can fix that person's idea of finishing everything on their plate as a bad thing, or having them every night throw away half their food on their plate. Things like that will start to shift that person's mindset and shift that and the idea of what's good and what's bad. And when it comes to these diets with names is what I call them, because those are the ones that tend to be the marketable thing, right? Like keto is marketable, carnivore is marketable, vertical diet, like all these diets with names are things that people, I think with good intentions, right? Like, besides filling up their pockets with money, there are decent intentions to these diets that people are trying to get, people to jump on the bandwagon, right? With keto diet, that was first introduced for people that had epilepsy and had seizures, and it was shown that it can help prevent that. So that was a good diet for people that had those issues. It's also a good diet for people that have autoimmune diseases, that have inflammation problems, right? So there's diets that are good, but then you have these influencers, which is if you're called an influencer, you should be very worried about that, because that means you're just mostly talking out your ass most of the time. But you have these influencers that are like keto diet, carnivore diet. This is the way you should go. Here's some research to back it up. And because people enjoy following them, they jump on this bandwagon, and they become very cultish about it. But I think the idea of any diet that you can't maintain, that you're like, I'm going to do keto for 30 days, right? If that's your approach, then that's not a diet that you should follow, because you know that it's not sustainable for you. It's like this idea of purging yourself or detoxing yourself for 30 days because carbohydrates are the devil, and just because Mark Bell tells you to do it, people want to do it. And it's like, you have to understand Mark's story, that, he has this idea that carbohydrates are bad. And once he starts eating them, he can't stop. And that's something that he's had issues with as a child, but he's never really wanted to confront those issues. So he's just picked diets that has eliminated that option for him. And what you're doing is you're essentially just putting on a Band-Aid and not actually fixing the psychological problem that underpins and underlies those emotional eating disorders that you have. Because a lot of people don't want to say that they have eating disorders, because it sounds like, a disorder of any sorts is something that is problematic for people that have egos, because then they feel like they're not in control. And I think that's what a lot of that influencer diet and type stuff is. You can get lean on any diet. You can perform at a high level on any diet. There's no good foods or bad foods. Things are just done in moderation. And there's a lot of, like you said, psychology to it, and understanding those underpinnings of emotional eating and eating disorders that you've developed over the years, and kind of just getting to the deep underroot of trying to fix those things.
That's all really heavy stuff. I know Paul and I talk a lot as coaches about how people often fall into the trap of, oh, well, it worked for me, so that's how I'm going to train everybody. And it doesn't seem too far off that the same thing happens in the nutrition world, where I lost weight doing this, or I reached my goal doing this, so now everybody should do that. And it's a great point that it is easy to market a diet with a name and get people to follow it and create this cult-like following surrounding something that might not take into account the varying factors of their lifestyles. So if somebody only has, I'm thinking of a doctor who works really long shifts, if they only have a few hours to eat, maybe intermittent fasting is great for them. But somebody who works from home, who has constant access to food, they might really struggle with that. So just, again, that there are a lot of different tools in the toolbox that you have at your disposal as a nutrition coach, and trying to be sort of dogmatic towards just one approach isn't going to be the best thing for the client.
Yeah, exactly. There's no binary approaches to training or nutrition. It's individualized to that person, what they've gone through genetically and environmentally, and who they are, on that given day. And then being able to actually coach that person is the important thing, right? That's what separates a coach from a programmer, or a coach from a macro giver, is the idea of being able to talk to that person as a human, as an individual, and understanding what their ticks are, what they love, what they don't love, and making sure that that person knows that they're being heard and that you're adjusting things accordingly, I think is one of the most important things. And like you said, man, there's people that find success with certain things, and they're not bad for talking about it. They're just misinformed with how they should be going about it, right? If you lost a bunch of weight on a certain diet, or you got really strong on a certain program, I think it's awesome that you tell people about it, because it changed your life and it made a huge impact on you. But you can't approach it in a way that you're telling people like they should do it, or you should just more or less tell them your story and what it meant to you, and allow people to figure it out from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, well-rounded approach, and it seems like you take that with everybody. Something that we haven't touched on yet that I'm curious about, because I know you have your own supplement company, but are there any supplements that you recommend that people take in addition to some of the diets that they're following?
Yeah, besides the ones I make, no. As a supplement owner,
Yeah, you can plug those.
no, as a supplement owner, I do a horrible job of marketing, because as a nutrition coach and as someone that like genuinely tries to help people, I understand how invaluable supplements can be, how they're overhyped, over publicized. A lot of the reasons people take supplements is because they're supplementing deficiencies within their current daily habits. So if you can fix those deficiencies without supplementing them, you're going to create a more longevity driven approach. From a sheer performance perspective, the two most highly reputable supplements on the market are going to be creatine and caffeine. The problem with caffeine is that it can affect your sleep. You can create adrenal problems from them. The more you take, the more you have to take to get the same response. So that's not necessarily something that I typically recommend. There is good research, and if you can follow the research, then you can have success with it. Creatine is definitely one of those supplements that I recommend for everyone. It's been proven time and time again to improve performance. If you can improve performance, you can typically improve muscle mass. And if you get bigger and stronger, it's typically easier to stay leaner. But besides that, there's really no supplements that I would ever recommend to someone that they couldn't get outside of, 8 hours of sleep, some type of sleep ritual, some type of good structured balanced diet. And besides that, that's really all they need. The supplements I make are kind of more or less to combat the fact that people are their own worst enemies a lot of time, which we have grown to seeing throughout this coronavirus, right? Like we tend to be our own worst enemies in many ways by like hoarding everything from grocery stores that they don't really need so that no one else has access to it, that type of approach, right? So I understand that people have this idea of energy drinks and pre-workouts are the way to go. And then they have, they take it at 6 o'clock at night when they go to train, and then they can't sleep. And then if they can't sleep, their performance starts to suffer. Their circadian rhythm gets off tracks, which increases their cravings, which increases their inability to stick to a diet. So I've made supplements to kind of help combat those things. And then also based off of the blood work that I've gotten from a lot of athletes, whether they be on PEDs or not, I made a health supplement to kind of combat some of those things, because as we know in general, right, if you're trying to be a high performer in any sport, it's not a healthy endeavor. You can have kidney issues, you can have liver issues if you're trying to push your training to an all-time new high. So being able to provide them with a health supplement that can help fix those things, and then the sleep aid helps people sleep, and then the stim-free nootropic is a solution or an alternative to high stim pre-workouts that people take at night to keep themselves awake, to keep them energized. But like I said, I always promote nutrition. I always promote proper sleep and proper programming. Those are the three most important things to help anyone with any of their goals. They don't really need anything else outside of those.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the owner of Subject Zero Supplements.
Yeah, so we'll plug you for you. Subject Zero Steps, Restoration, Sleep Aid, Ascend is your nootropic, and then what's the name of your
Equilibrium?
Okay.
Health supplement.
Yeah, so I'll vouch for you. I mean, I bought that Restoration. I know Mondays and Tuesdays I always have a really hard time because I have a late night at the gym followed by an early morning, and so using Restoration, those really hard mornings are not as hard anymore. So
that's awesome to hear, man. Yeah. I try to let the product speak for themselves. Like I said, I'm horrible at marketing. I don't like to talk about that type of stuff. I like to talk to just help people, not to put money in my pockets. But I guess that's important, right? So you got to pay your bills.
You can help more people for more money you have in your pockets, right?
Yes, I hope so. You know what they say? Power corrupts.
We'll cut you off before you get to that point.
I appreciate it.
So to finish up here, what would you nail down as the biggest takeaways for people when it comes to adhering to their diet plan, as well as the biggest mistakes that they can avoid when it comes to falling off the wagon?
Yeah, so adherence to your diet plan is the idea of small wins and small adjustments. So, don't make this elaborate plan of these huge fundamental changes to your life and to your diet, thinking that that's going to be sustainable, and then also allowing yourself to enjoy these small wins. Like, hey, I made it through a meal and I ate vegetables and some fruit instead of a Snickers bar. Like, enjoy that win, pat yourself on the back for that type of stuff, because that's very hard to overcome those bad habits. And every time you can successfully do that and tell yourself you're an awesome person for doing that, you're reinforcing the likelihood that you'll continue on that path. And then making sure, some of the biggest pitfalls, I would say, is eliminating entire macronutrients completely within people's diets, following some crazy, like we talked about, some crazy name diet that, like carnivore. If you can only eat meat, that's not going to be something that I would ever recommend to a general population person. It would be more or less, finding something that sounds good to you, that you can adhere to, that has every single food group that you can think of in it. And then another pitfall would be being way too aggressive with their approach, wanting to lose too much weight too fast, or giving themselves these strict guidelines or these strict deadlines that they have to meet, and they'll go to those extremes to do it without thinking about what's going to be left over for them after those 12 weeks are up, and how do they recover from that, and what does that look like. Those would be the two biggest pitfalls I've seen with people when it comes to nutrition, for sure.
All right, avoid those things and everybody will have those Instagram abs, right? No.
Yeah.
That one missed. I missed the mark with that one. All right. So, Tony, thanks a lot, man. You gave us over an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. Where can people get in contact with you if they would like to talk to you or learn more about what you do?
Yeah, you can reach me at teamphoenixperformance.com. I wish we had a shorter name, but that's just the way it goes. You can follow me on Instagram, Tony Montgomery Jr., and my supplement company, subject0_sups. And then the online coaching and nutrition is Team Phoenix Performance, all on Instagram and Facebook. And if you are in the Portland, Oregon area and things get back to normal and you want to train at a good gym, we own a gym called Strength Union out here. We'd love to have as many members as we could that are want to train hard. But that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, and you can read my coaches' blogs and columns on Elite FTS if you guys find those valuable. And I do have a podcast as well called Beyond the Platform. So if you guys find any of those things valuable and you enjoy them, then continue to follow along. If you hate them, that's fine as well. Can't make everyone like you. That's the idea.
Read Tony's stuff. He puts out great stuff. Podcast is funny too.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Tony. This is Paul Ryan from Resilient Training Lab. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to leave us a rating, comments, subscribe, all those fun things, and we'll catch you next time.